This is a good example of what we were talking about yesterday with the religious laws. Here Jesus is expecting the human heart, the human conscience, present before its own Creator, to respond to the Creator in a way that is reflective of Him, to say, yes, indeed, it would be good to see this man's hand healed. Jesus is talking about here the sort of what we would call a sin of omission. Here there is the possibility to do good and to heal and to restore someone. Therefore, to not do it would be a sin, would be evil. Of course, Jesus can't do this. Balanced against the law of the Sabbath, the law of the Sabbath just doesn't even hold a candle to that light, right? So Jesus is trying to get them to see, look, in another place where he says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, he says, look, the Sabbath is made as a day of rest and liberty. This man is enslaved and is burdened. Let us take away his burden and free him from the slavery so that he might also enter into the life of the Sabbath. They just don't see that, right? They're too bound to, if I just follow the law, then everything will be okay. And that's not true. It's not true today either. Just because I go to Mass on Sunday and punch my ticket does not mean that I am pleasing the Lord. It certainly means I'm not displeasing the Lord in that regard, but it doesn't mean I'm living a life reflective of the degree of charity to which God is calling me. St. Anthony's a good example of that. He was a wealthy man. He had a sister. He was orphaned when he was probably around 18 or 19. And he was going to church one day and he heard the gospel, go and sell all that you have and come and follow me. And he was struck with that. There was something in his conscience, unlike the Pharisees sitting in the presence of the Word made flesh, Anthony, hearing the same word proclaimed at Mass, went and sold most of what he had. And he started living an ascetic life. He kept some of it back in order to take care of his sister. But on going to church another day, he heard again the words of the gospel, do not worry about tomorrow, let the evils of today suffice for the day. And so he did. He went and sold everything he had. He gave his sister over to the care of some virgins who were living in community in the town. And he went into the desert and lived a life of total abandon to the Lord, working by the sweat of his own brow to earn his bread and to listen to Scripture and to pray and to study God's commands, and to such a degree that people noticed him. And he really kind of converted the whole area, right? And in fact, he became such a model of the apostolic virtues of prayer, poverty, chastity, and obedience, that he became essentially known as the founder of monasticism. Now, all the monks of the world trace their sort of idea of living these apostolic councils back to Anthony, right? And it was just from this sense of I must be more than the law. It is not enough for me just to go and live a normal life and do the minimum required religiosity to not displease the Lord. I want to go and live my whole life for Him. And sort of driven by that desire, and then open to the Word, the way that God was talking to him about it, and he discerning that call of how God wanted me specifically to live a higher life, a more noble life, a more worthy life of the call to which he was called in baptism. Anthony went out into the desert and lived austerity and simplicity. We can't be bound, right, to the prescriptions. This is also another big place where people do this is if a person who gives 10% of their net income, they're like, I'm tithing. The Lord has nothing against me in terms of tithing. Remember, we've got three parts of the spiritual life, right? Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, also called tithing. Right? And almsgiving, of course, is nothing more than to be mindful of the mercy, the opportunities of mercy around me. How do I use my intellect? How do I use my my labor, how do I use my resources to aid in the needs of those around me. Jesus did this here with his power to heal. He saw a need to apply mercy to this man whose hands was withered, and he did so, right? That was a tithing. That was Jesus tithing his divine power, right? So when we talk about tithing as Christians, we do not limit ourselves, nor do we hold ourselves virtuous by adhering to a 10% rule. That's a Jewish rule. Judaism doesn't belong in the world anymore. Judaism is past. Judaism is the only reason there are still Jews in the world is because they're stubborn and they refuse to become Christians. Right? So the Jewish understanding of the law does not belong in the mind or heart of a Christian. And this is what Jesus is showing us here. The Pharisees are excellent Jews. They understand the Jewish understanding of the law perfectly. And Jesus is grieved by that. Right? So when we look to ourselves, to our own wealth, to our own income, to our own resources, be they material resources, intellectual resources, cleverness, tirelessness in labor, regardless of what it is, we don't look at the way we have given what God has given us back to others by a 10% rule. We look at it as the sheer need of mercy in our environment. Wherever I am, is there need to show mercy? Do I have the capacity to assist in that mercy or in that injustice and bring God's mercy? And if I do, I must. And if it means I have to sell my second house down in Florida, that's what I do. If it means I have to sell my third or fourth car, that's what I do. If it means that I have to shut down one of my bank accounts and empty it out in order to give this person something that they need, that's what I do. If it means I no longer sit at home in the evenings with a glass of scotch and a cigar, as I like to do, right? Because there's some place else and someone else that I need to be at and helping, that's what I do. I don't have my cigar and my whiskey. Right? None of that has anything to do with 10% or 15% or 5%. It has to do with the need to show Christ's mercy in the world. That's how a Christian exceeds the law, supersedes the law, lives above the law. Not holding themselves unaccountable, but indeed holding themselves more accountable to the law, not of Deuteronomy, but the law of charity. The law of charity which perceives in the world the need to show Christ's mercy and responds accordingly, even to its own impoverishment. Right? The more we give, even of what we hold dear, the more we will be closer to Jesus Christ, the more we'll be in conformity to him. And like St. Anthony, people will begin to see us and call us friends of God.